The night I almost died didn't start with drama. It started with groceries. I had just left a small corner market a few blocks from my apartment, balancing a paper bag against my chest, thinking about nothing more important than whether the bread would survive the walk home. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier rain, the streetlights already on, throwing long yellow reflections across the asphalt. I am 67 years old. I move slower than I used to, but I'm careful. I've learned how to be. That didn't matter. I heard the engine before I saw the vehicle. A delivery van came around the corner too fast, its tires hissing on wet pavement. I stepped back instinctively, my heel caught the curb. The rest came in pieces, the bag tearing, the sound of metal. The sudden weightlessness before the ground rose up and struck me hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. Pain has a way of stripping things down to essentials. I remember staring up at the sky between buildings, trying to breathe, knowing something inside me was wrong. Not scraped, not bruised, wrong. A stranger's voice floated above me. Then another. Someone said they'd called for help. Someone else told me not to move. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and pressure and questions I answered too slowly. By the time we reached the hospital, my vision had narrowed to a tunnel, and the ceiling lights slid past like stars. A doctor leaned over me in the emergency room. Calm voice. Practiced urgency. Internal bleeding. Blunt force trauma. They needed to operate immediately. No waiting. No discussion. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. They asked for my emergency contact. I gave them 3 names. I have 3 children, 2 older, 1 youngest daughter. The surgeon explained that there was risk. Significant risk. At my age, nothing is simple. They needed consent, financial clearance, someone to make decisions if things went wrong. The calls went out while they prepped me. I remember the ceiling again, this time rushing faster, the sounds sharper. A nurse squeezed my hand and told me to count backwards. I didn't make it very far. When I woke up, everything hurt in a dull, echoing way. Tubes beeping, a tight band across my abdomen that felt like it was holding me together by force alone. The doctor came later. Surgery had gone as well as it could have. They'd stopped the bleeding. I was alive. Barely had time to absorb that before a different kind of pain arrived. None of my children were in the room. A nurse stood at the foot of the bed with a clipboard. She looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they've been handed a message they don't want to deliver. "They reached your children," she said carefully. I waited. 2 of them declined to authorize anything further. They said they couldn't take responsibility for the cost. The words landed slowly. Declined. Cost. I asked about my youngest daughter. "She's on her way," the nurse said, softer now. She asked a lot of questions. That told me more than she realized. The next day, I learned the full picture. The surgery had gone through because the hospital couldn't wait, but the bills were real, large, immediate. The older 2 had answered the phone. They had listened, and they had said no. No to helping, no to showing up, no to standing beside me when I didn't even know if I'd wake up. My youngest daughter arrived that evening, eyes red, hair pulled back in a rush. She took my hand like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. "I'm here," she said. "I don't have much, but I'm here." She had never had much. She struggled, she scraped by, but she showed up. The others sent messages later, not concern, not apologies, questions about accounts, about property, about what would happen if I didn't recover fully. Lying there, stitched together, listening to machines breathe for me, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The accident hadn't just broken my body, it had stripped the story down to its truth. 2 of my children saw me as a liability. 1 saw me as her father. And once I understood that, everything that came after became very clear. While I was still in that hospital bed, they started planning for a future that assumed I wouldn't be around to stop them. The hospital has a sound of its own at night. Machines humming. Shoes squeaking down the hallway. Voices lowered out of habit, not kindness. I lay there listening to it all, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling like my body had been loaned back to me instead of returned. My youngest daughter slept in a chair beside the bed, folded awkwardly, jacket still on. She'd insisted on staying even when the nurse told her visiting hours were over. She didn't argue. She just stayed quiet and didn't move. That's how you know someone means it. The older two called the next morning, not together, separately, careful not to overlap. The first voice was my son's, measured, polite, like he was calling a bank, not a hospital. "I'm glad you pulled through," he said. "We were worried." He hadn't come. I told him I was stable. "That's good," he replied. "Listen, we need to talk about next steps." Next steps. He asked about insurance, about deductibles, about whether I had updated my paperwork recently. Not once did he ask how much pain I was in. When the call ended, I stared at my phone for a long time before setting it face down on the tray. The second call came an hour later. My older daughter. Her voice carried urgency, but not the right kind. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. "This is a lot to put on us all at once." Us. She explained carefully that she had obligations. A mortgage. Children of her own. She said she wished things were different, but she couldn't contribute financially. Then she asked if I'd considered appointing someone to manage my affairs while I recovered. I told her I'd think about it. After the call, my youngest daughter woke up. She didn't ask what they'd said. She didn't need to. She took my hand again, like anchoring me. "They didn't help, did they?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. She nodded once. "I'll figure something out." I knew what that meant. Extra shifts, late nights, skipping things she already went without. The guilt hit harder than the pain in my abdomen. Later that afternoon, a hospital administrator came by with a stack of forms. She spoke gently, but the message underneath was firm. They needed a payment plan. They needed signatures. They needed a responsible party. My youngest daughter stood up before I could say anything. "I'll handle it," she said. The administrator hesitated. She looked at my daughter's worn shoes, her frayed bag. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," my daughter said. "I'm sure." I stopped her. "No," I said, "on you won't." She looked at me, startled. "This isn't yours to carry," I told her. She sat back down, eyes wet, jaw set. That evening, the older two sent a joint message. That alone was unusual. They wanted to visit. The next day, they said it would be good to talk face to face. I agreed. They arrived together, dressed well, carrying concern like a briefcase they could open and close as needed. They stood at the foot of my bed. We talked about my recovery, about how lucky I was, about how close it had been. Then the conversation shifted. They suggested that managing my finances might be stressful for me right now. They suggested a temporary arrangement. They suggested protection. I listened without interrupting. Finally, I asked one question. "Where were you when they wheeled me into surgery?" Silence filled the room. They exchanged a glance. The answer was obvious. After they left, I asked for a pen. Not to sign anything, to write. Some lessons come too late to avoid the pain. Others come just in time to avoid repeating it. I was still lying in that hospital bed when I made a decision that would change how this story ended. The papers they brought me next looked helpful on the surface, but I recognized them for what they really were. They brought the papers in a blue folder. That detail stuck with me because it felt deliberate. Blue looks official, trustworthy, calm, the kind of color people choose when they want you to stop asking questions. My older daughter placed it on the tray table like she was doing me a favor. "We just want to make things easier for you," she said, "while you recover." The language was careful, soft, supportive. My son stood beside her, arms folded, nodding at the right moments. I didn't open the folder right away. At 67, you learn the value of pauses. People rush to fill them, and that's when they tell you what matters. "These are standard forms," my son added. "Temporary authority, nothing permanent." Temporary is one of the most dangerous words in paperwork. I flipped the folder open slowly. The pages were dense, heavy with legal phrasing meant to exhaust rather than inform. But the intent was clear. Control over accounts, property, medical decisions, the ability to act on my behalf without needing my consent each time. They wanted my life handed over neatly, while I was still stitched together and medicated. I closed the folder. "I'll need time," I said. My older daughter sighed. Not loudly. "Just enough." "We don't have time," she replied. "Things need to be handled." My youngest daughter stood near the window, silent, watching. That night, after visiting hours ended, she sat beside me and traced the edge of the tray with her finger. "They think you don't see it," she said. "I see it," I replied. She swallowed. "I don't trust them." Neither do I. The next morning, a social worker stopped by. She spoke about recovery plans and support systems, about making sure I wouldn't be overwhelmed. The timing wasn't an accident. By the afternoon, my older children returned with a different tone, less warmth, more pressure. They spoke about responsibility, about what would happen if something went wrong again, about how fragile I was now. I asked my son a question. If I sign this, I said, when do I get it back? He hesitated. Once things stabilize, he answered. Stabilize meant never. I handed the folder back. I'm not signing today. The room cooled. My older daughter's voice sharpened. You're being unreasonable. I'm being careful, I replied. She looked at my youngest daughter. You're filling his head. My youngest daughter didn't flinch. I'm protecting him, she said. That night I asked the nurse for my phone and called an old friend. Not family. Someone who'd known me long before this moment. By morning I had clarity. The accident had taken strength from my body, but it hadn't taken my mind. They returned again, this time with a lawyer on speakerphone. He explained things slowly, patiently, as if speaking to someone diminished. I let him finish. Then I asked him if he'd reviewed the medical report that said I was mentally competent. Silence on the line. My older children left angry. My youngest daughter stayed. She brought soup from home, sat with me while I ate, talked about ordinary things, normal things. It grounded me. Before discharge, the hospital required one last decision. Who would handle my care after I left? I didn't hesitate. I named my youngest daughter. The looks on the others' faces when they found out told me everything. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing access, and now they were. Once I left the hospital, they stopped pretending, and that's when the real pressure began. Leaving the hospital should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like stepping onto unstable ground. My youngest daughter drove me to her place first. Not because it was ideal, but because it was quiet. And I needed quiet more than comfort. I moved slowly, every motion reminding me that my body had limits now. She never rushed me, never made me feel like an inconvenience. The older two didn't come. They sent messages instead, long ones, concern layered over frustration, advice wrapped around accusation. They said they were worried about my recovery, about my safety, about the decisions I was making under stress. They didn't mention the papers again, not directly. The pressure came sideways. A call from my bank asking to confirm unusual inquiries. An email from my insurance provider referencing third-party questions. A voicemail from a property office asking whether I'd authorized someone else to access my records. I hadn't. Someone was circling. My youngest daughter noticed before I said anything. She always did. They're trying to get in without asking, she said. Yes, I replied, and they think I won't notice. I asked her to bring me my files, the old ones, the ones I'd kept in a locked drawer for years and never thought I'd need again. Deeds, statements, policies, updated documents I'd revised quietly after retirement. I had never been careless. The next visit from the older two came unannounced. They stood in the doorway, polished and tense, eyes scanning the space like they were assessing value. This isn't appropriate, my son said. You should be somewhere better equipped. I am, I answered. I'm somewhere honest. My older daughter crossed her arms. You're being influenced. By someone who showed up, I said. That landed harder than I expected. They pivoted quickly. They spoke about my will, about fairness, about how things should be divided if something happened. My youngest daughter stood up then. Not angry, just firm. He's still here, she said. You're talking like he's already gone. Silence. That's when they made their mistake. They told me they'd already spoken to someone about adjusting arrangements. Just in case. They said it casually, like it was responsible. I asked for details. They gave none. After they left, I made calls of my own, careful ones. The truth surfaced quickly. They had tried to initiate changes without authority. Nothing illegal yet, but close enough to be concerning. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from pain. From clarity. I realized they weren't waiting for me to recover. They were waiting for me to weaken. The next morning I asked my youngest daughter to help me schedule an appointment. Quiet, private. No notifications sent. We sat together across from a desk while I spoke clearly and slowly, outlining everything. The accident, the hospital, the pressure, the attempts. I wasn't emotional. I was precise. When it was over, I signed what needed signing. Not out of fear, out of certainty. When we left, my youngest daughter looked at me like she was seeing me differently. "I didn't know you'd thought this far ahead," she said. "I hoped I wouldn't need to," I replied. By the time the older two realized something had changed, it was already done. They called that evening. Angry now. No softness left. They accused. They threatened. They warned me I was making a mistake I couldn't undo. I listened. Then I told them the conversation was over. They didn't like that, but they no longer had leverage, and they knew it. What they did next wasn't about money anymore. It was about forcing control back into their hands. They stopped asking. That was the first sign something had shifted. When people like control, they talk. They explain, they justify. When they realize it's slipping away, they get quiet and start moving pieces instead. The first sign came as a letter. Not handwritten, not personal. Official. Heavy paper. Formal language. It claimed concern for my well-being. It suggested that recent decisions might have been made under duress. It recommended an evaluation. Not mandatory, it said. Advisable. My youngest daughter read it twice, then looked at me. "They're trying to question your capacity," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and they're late." Because the truth was I had already documented everything. The accident, the surgery, the medical clearance confirming my mental soundness, the attempts they'd made while I was still in a hospital bed. I had also done something else. Quietly. The older two showed up 3 days later. No warning. They stood outside the door, tense and rehearsed. "We just want to talk," my older daughter said. I didn't invite them in. We spoke in the hallway where words echo and witnesses exist. They accused my youngest daughter of manipulation, of isolating me, of taking advantage. She didn't speak. I did. She didn't ask for anything. I said, "You did." That changed the tone. My son's voice dropped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I'm making it honest." They threatened legal action. I told them they were welcome to try. That was the moment their confidence cracked. Because confidence depends on certainty, and they no longer had any. Over the next week, the pressure escalated in smaller ways. Calls to distant relatives, messages framed as concern, suggestions that I was being stubborn, confused, prideful. I ignored them all. My youngest daughter continued working her shifts, continued helping me heal, continued acting like nothing had changed, even though everything had. One night, as she was washing dishes, she said something quietly. "I never expected anything from you." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "That's why this hurts," she added. "They think this is about money." "It isn't," I replied. "It's about trust." The final move came sooner than I expected. A notice arrived stating that a request had been made to review my accounts due to potential elder exploitation. They had crossed the line, but they had done it sloppily. The review didn't scare me. It confirmed what I already knew. Within days, it collapsed under its own weight. There was no evidence, no pattern, no confusion, just a clear record of attempts made by two people who assumed proximity gave them entitlement. When they were informed of the outcome, they called me. Not angry this time. Afraid. They asked if we could fix this, if there was a way forward, if I'd reconsider my position. I told them the truth. "You made your choices when I was lying on a hospital bed," I said. "I made mine when I stood back up." Silence followed. After that, they stopped reaching out. The space they left behind felt heavy at first. Then it felt peaceful. My youngest daughter and I sat together one evening. Paperwork spread across the table. Everything was clear now. Final. Intentional. She looked nervous. "I don't want this to come between us," she said. "It won't," I replied, "because it isn't about what I'm giving you." She frowned. "It's about who stayed," I finished. I slept better that night than I had since the accident. Not because the pain was gone, because the doubt was. When the final documents were executed, there was no confrontation, only consequences, and they arrived quietly. The last signatures were quiet. No raised voices, no arguments, no dramatic confrontations, just ink on paper and a calm understanding that some decisions don't need witnesses. By the time everything was finalized, my body was stronger than it had been weeks earlier. Not whole, not yet, but steady. I could walk without help. I could sleep through the night. I could sit at the table and breathe without feeling like something might come apart inside me. Healing has layers. Some of them aren't physical. My youngest daughter sat across from me while the final documents were explained. She listened carefully, hands folded, saying very little. That was her way. She never assumed, never reached for things that weren't offered. When it was over, she looked at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. "You don't owe me anything," she said finally. "I know," I replied. That was exactly why this worked. The older two found out through their lawyer. There was no scene, no shouting, no last attempt to bargain. By then they understood that what they'd lost wasn't just financial. They had lost standing. They sent a message a week later, short, careful. They said they hoped I was well. They said maybe someday we could talk. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. Some conversations happened too late to matter. Life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were slow, evenings were quiet. My youngest daughter kept working, still struggling, still scraping by, still refusing to change who she was just because circumstances had shifted. That mattered to me more than anything else. One afternoon she asked me if I regretted it. Not the documents, the distance. I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said. "I regret that it took an accident for me to see clearly." She nodded. She understood. The truth is, the accident didn't take anything from me that mattered. It gave me something back. Clarity. I learned who saw me as a burden and who saw me as a father. Who counted costs before concern and who showed up with empty hands and a full heart. I learned that love doesn't negotiate. It arrives. And when it does, it stays. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. What I leave behind will go to someone who never asked for it, never demanded it, and never tried to take it while I was lying broken and afraid. That feels like winning. Not because money changed hands, but because loyalty did not. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.